We're going to all have a seat and pay special attention to our special keynote author this year. Those of you who have been here before know I don't read anything that's on the program. So if you haven't read the program, you won't know what he has done. So you better read the program as he's getting ready to come up. But I love it. I absolutely love it when I reach out to an author that I have never met, exchange a few emails, and the next thing I know, they've signed that contract and said, Sharon, I'll be there. And they don't give me not any problems, because I have enough other problems. And this is one of them. So come on up, Dwayne Alexander Smith.
Hello. I got to use my glasses, and I actually wrote a speech. So I don't know if everyone here knows what my book's about, but I wrote a book called 40 Acres. Thank you. And for those who don't know what it's about a group of black men, very rich, very powerful, who keep white slaves secretly, and they don't treat them very well. And you know, I love telling people what the book's about because I like to see their reaction when I tell them what the book's about, with one exception. When I'm driving in the middle of nowhere and I'm stopped by two white cops, and I'm driving a Maserati, and they see the book on the passenger seat and they say, "What's that book about?" And I said, "It's about farmers." It's about friendly black farmers. And you guys are not interested in this book. Anyway, for me to receive an invitation to be a keynote speaker is an unexpected honor. But of course, the first thing I asked myself was, what am I going to speak about? The advice given to me by several people was, just talk about yourself. Talk about your journey to becoming a writer. At first I thought, nah, nobody cares. But after thinking about it, I realized that there was one aspect of my life that might be worthy of a keynote speech, especially before a gathering of readers and authors. You see, I wouldn't be speaking here before you today if not for one very fortunate event. A book saved my life. Literally, a book saved my life. That's what I want to talk about today. But first, I want to thank Sharon Lucas and the Reading Divas for inviting me here. This is truly for me a great honor. So, I was raised by a teenage mother and a drug dealer father named Snake in what was then the worst neighborhood in the world, or the country, the South Bronx. My neighborhood was so decrepit and so run down that film studios used to come and shoot post-apocalyptic movies right down the street from my block. I'm serious, like seriously. I'd love to tell you that the guys I ran the streets with graduated from college and became doctors and lawyers and captains of industry, but that's not what happened. The truth is, many of them are now in prison or they're dead. But I escaped, I beat the odds. And sometimes people ask me, how'd you do it? What motivated you? What made you take a different path? The funny thing is, I know exactly what made the difference. I can narrow it down to a single moment in my childhood. I was 6 or 7, I was in elementary school. On this particular day, the class was taken to the school library. They taught us about the Dewey Decimal System and the difference between fiction and nonfiction and how to treat a book with respect. Then they let us free in the library. They told us to, run around and try to find a book to take home, like to borrow. So I wandered around, I looked at all the pretty covers, but I had no clue what to read. But then a pusher tapped me on the shoulder. Not a drug pusher, a book pusher. Her name was Susan Serrano. She was my teacher, and this woman loved books more than anything. She also loved getting others hooked on books. And you're probably thinking, well, yeah, of course, she's a teacher. Teachers get kids to read. That's what teachers do. It's true, but Miss Serrano, I'm telling you, she had a crazy passion of books that went far and beyond a teacher's duty. When she tapped me on my shoulder, she was holding a book. She handed it to me and she said, "I know you're gonna love this book." And at that moment, it changed my life. Her handing me that book was the moment that saved me. I remember holding that book in my hand. I remember the whimsical title. It was called A Wrinkle in Time. And of course, I remember the author's name, Madeleine L'Engle. But most of all, I remember reading A Wrinkle in Time. I remember the awe, the wonder, and the curiosity that book inspired in me. That book affected me like a drug. Instantly, I was addicted to science fiction and fantasy, and I needed more. I started reading every sci-fi classic, every fantasy classic, mysteries, adventures. If you actually found a photograph of me at this time in my life, I was probably holding a book. All of this reading expanded my young mind and changed my perspective on life. It was like one moment, I was viewing the world through this broken window, and all I could see was abandoned buildings and gangs and drug pushers and kids getting shot for their sneakers. And the next, it was like I was on a mountaintop, and I could see in all directions. I could see all sorts of possibilities. I could see a real future for myself that I had never dreamed of before. And by the time I was 14 years old, I came to realize that reading amazing stories just was not enough for me. Suddenly, I had an irresistible urge to tell stories, to craft my own stories. I now had a dream to be a professional storyteller. And I spent the rest of my life pursuing that dream. I first chose filmmaking as a path to storytelling because, at the time, a medium that required sophisticated equipment and a small army of technicians and actors seemed far less intimidating to me than writing a whole book. Eventually, I figured out that independent filmmaking was crazy expensive. That's when I started taking writing very seriously. Through the years, I've had many setbacks, but I've never looked back. I've been a professional writer now for 15 years. I've sold numerous screenplays to major studios, and my first novel won several honors, including an NAACP Image Award for Best Debut Author. My lifelong dream has actually come true. Now, I believe that life is a combination of choices and happenstance. While it is true that an infinite amount of events shape who we are, it's also true that a single event can have an overwhelming effect. Who knows how my life would have turned out if Ms. Serrano hadn't handed me that book? But I do not believe that I would be standing here today as a professional storyteller telling you my story. I'd be someone else, probably doing some other job. Or maybe I'd be in prison, or maybe I'd be dead. Now, I feel strongly that the story of my journey to this podium today relates directly to the problems in the black community in regards to our young black men. Problems like the outrageous number of shootings in places like Chicago, the legions of black men wasting away behind prison walls, the high rate of black on black crime, or more to the point, the high rate of black male youth on black male youth crime. Yes, I know these are complicated issues with an assortment of causes, but like I said, sometimes just one action can have a huge effect. I won't bore you with literary proficiency rates, I can barely say it, but I urge you to all go online and review the data for yourself. When it comes to young black boys, the numbers are very disturbing. I'm talking now about elementary school kids, 3rd and 4th graders, where it all starts. And to me, and I'm sure to everyone in this room who loves reading, this is very heartbreaking. I've had kids look me in the eye without a hint of embarrassment and say, "I don't read." When I was their age, if you weren't a fan of reading, you at least knew that reading was important enough and respected enough to fib about it. And no, it's not that our 8 and 9-year-olds can't read. It's that they don't love to read. I think the love of reading is so important to a child. And no, I'm not saying that getting our young boys to love reading is going to solve all the problems I mentioned earlier. But here's what I am saying. Reading matters to black lives. I stand here before you as a testament to the power the love of reading has to change a life. Reading matters to black lives. There are many ways to address the problems in our community, and there are many fine organizations and activists trying to do just that. But I think there's something else to be done. Something everyone here in this room can do to help spark the love of reading in black youth. And yes, I know I've been focused on mostly boys for a reason I hope everyone here understands. But of course, feel free to apply the suggestion I'm about to give you to girls as well. I want everyone here to pick a book. Any book, as long as it's suitable for young readers and as long as it's a great book. Then I want you to look around in your community for that kid that's browsing that great library we call life. He'll be easy to spot. He's the kid drawn to shiny things and to noisy things, but he's not sure what to pick up. He's not certain what he wants to commit to. I want you to tap that kid on the shoulder, and I want you to hand him that great book. And I want you to say to him or her, "This is a great book. I think you'll love it." And you never know. You just might be saving that child's life. Thank you. And that's basically my story. I'm not moving.
We're going to give you all a chance, just a few minutes, to ask Dwayne a few questions. How is that? Ladies will be
Yes.
in the audience
Yes.
with,
Oh,
I'm
she had
sorry.
her hand up. I'm
and
sorry.
I want you, if you have a question, to stand so that we can all hear it.
What inspired? First, I loved your book. I loved your book.
Thank you.
I'm going to read it again, and I'll tell anybody who has not read the book, you must read 40 Acres. It's an amazing
Thank
book.
you.
You'll be up late at night and early in the morning and into the next morning trying to finish this book. Thank you. Thank you so much for writing that book. Thank you for your story. I grew up in Brooklyn.
Okay.
I'm a little bit older than you, but I remember those times.
Okay.
And the library, the library was a sanctuary.
Yes.
What inspired you to write? What was your inspiration for writing 40 Acres?
For 40 Acres?
Yes.
For a long time, I wanted to write a story about slavery. But I didn't want to write a story, your traditional slavery story, which was a story that took place on a plantation, et cetera, that we've seen a million times. Not that those stories are not important, but I just wanted to find a different way into the story, because when you tell people you're writing a story about slavery, they immediately get bored, or they're like, I don't want to read that. They don't, a lot of people don't want to face that truth. So I didn't want to write this. I wanted to write a story that would grab people's attention, and I can get to them in another way, like sneak it around the back a little bit. So I started thinking about writing it as a science fiction story, actually. It was going to be like 12 Years a Slave, but like a science fiction version of 12 Years a Slave. So it's going to be an astronaut goes out into space, a black astronaut, obviously, goes out into space, and he's coming back from his mission, and something goes wrong, and he goes back in time, and now he's in antebellum South, and he can't, it's like a little Planet of the Apes in there, he can't talk, and he's a brilliant man, but he can't talk, and he's captured with a bunch of slaves. So for the readers, for us, we get a view of slavery through a modern man's eyes. And I might still write that book, actually. But as I started working on it, actually this was for a movie. I was thinking of it for a movie. I wasn't thinking as a book. And I started talking to people about it, talking to the producers and my agent, and et cetera, et cetera. And people kept telling me, no, that's not going to work. And I kept changing the story. And I made it more contemporary. It's going to be black people enslaved in factories here, and then one day, and I know a lot of writers here will tell you, one day you just get struck with an idea. And I said, hey, what if I flipped it? What if it's black guys holding white people as slaves? And when I told my friends, my writing friends, I told them that. They said, oh man, that is an awesome idea, but you will never make that work. It will never work. So I took it as a challenge. I'm like, okay, we'll see. So my approach was basically, I'm going to figure out exactly how this would be done. Like, if you were going to do this today, how would you really do it? So I did that, and I took it to my agent and manager, and they said, no way that we could make this a movie. This is too crazy. Yeah, so I love the story so much that I decided, you know what, I'm going to write a book. Because secretly, every screenwriter wants to be a book writer. So that's the long answer to your question. Well, I'm working on another book now, but I plan to write it next year. Yeah, I have it already figured out. So, any other questions?
Let me just say, what the fudge? For real. Loved it. I know that you have to have had some strange reactions because I follow you on social media. So what has been the most strangest reaction that you've gotten from the book? Because we follow you, so we read some of the stuff and the shenanigans and the accusing you of different things in the book, you know.
Right.
But so what have been some of the most strange things that have happened as a result of writing this book?
Strange thing. Something strange happened today. Today, actually. I was eating breakfast. I'll get to a better one, but I was eating breakfast in the buffet today, and then I left and I went to the business center to print out my speech, and the woman in the business center kept staring at me, and I'm like, why are you staring at me? And then I look on her screen and she has my picture on her computer screen. And this is a white woman. This is like and she kept staring. I was like, what are you doing? She said, oh, because I saw you in the room and I heard you talking. I just wanted to find out who you were, like what you were doing. Anyway, no, I've gotten stopped and I've literally I think this is amazing. I don't know how this is possible. I've gotten stopped in the middle of like nowhere. Somebody was on a bike riding by and they said, are you Dwayne Alexander Smith? I'm like, that's amazing. I've gotten emails with the best thing about, I gotta say, like, as a screenwriter, you do not connect with your audience. There's no connection at all. I mean, if you write a bunch of screenplays, you sell a bunch of screenplays, more than likely most of them won't get made. Even if they do get made, you don't really have a direct connection with your readers. But writing a book, man, I've met so many readers, and this is like an amazing experience for someone who's been writing so long and has never really had feedback like that. So I get emails from people from literally all over the world, actually, because the book sells in other countries. But I get emails from people who tell me stuff like this guy who I don't know, he was in some college. He says, Dwayne, I never read books. I never read a book before, but for some reason, somebody told me to read this book and I read it. And he's like, how you do it? I love this book. And I'm gonna tell this is some white guy in some college. I don't know who he is. I got a letter from a white woman, old, very like 80 in her 80s, and she's like, I grew up in the South, and I read this book, and it gave me a different perspective of how Black people see America, things like that. So I get all kinds of reactions. I also get some negative reactions, but I never get them directly from people. They don't directly email me negative stuff. They just kind of print it all over the internet. So the best one is someone decided that 40 Acres was like my wet dream. It's like, this is something that I dream about, and and this is something I want to happen. And honestly, if you read the book, you know that I don't agree with what's going on in the book at all. But some people will accuse me of that. So.
Okay, now that we've done with 40 Acres, what else is in your mind as future books, plural, that we can expect in the future?
Well, I like writing thrillers. I like writing page turners. Like that's the type of books that I like to read. So I'm writing 2 books at the same time, and one of them is a straight up the middle thriller, just dealing with a whole different subject. It's nothing to do with 40 Acres. And I'm writing another book that is really interesting. Somebody today, I was in a panel today, and they were talking about world building and fantasy. It's not a fantasy. Well, I guess it's kind of a fantasy book. And I can tell you a little bit about it, but I won't get very deeply into it. I'm writing a book about us starting our own country, and that country being, this is happening today. It's going to be. I know there's other books about this, but I'm taking it to a whole nother level. It's going to be a book about us starting our own country, like Black Americans starting our own country, and so it's basically a bit of world building to do. Because I'm taking the same approach I took to 40 Acres. It's like, how would it really be done? How would it really exist? Like, how would it get funded? How would it get built? What would the rules be? It's that sort of thing. But I'm using that only as a backdrop for a thriller. So. So that's what I'm working on.
I haven't read your book yet, but I was just wondering, have you incorporated any of your life books in terms of how you came up. Now, I'm from the South Bronx.
Right. You from the South Bronx?
Yes.
Where?
I grew up on Petona Avenue in Boston Road.
Petona Park East. Petona Park East. What school
See,
you
we
go
both
to?
made it out.
You both made it.
Well, because my parents didn't want me to go to Morris,
Uh-huh.
I went to Evander.
Evangelist? Uh-huh.
So I had to lie and give another address. And then one day, I guess it was too many of us coming to Evander, so they decided, well, let me give them a little test. So they asked us things like, where's the bakery and where's the so-and-so? Hey, you see them? I didn't know any of those things.
Right.
And also we had to steal our train passes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since we were supposed to live in the area, we weren't supposed to get a train pass.
Right.
So we would have to fool whoever was giving out the train passes, and somebody would run and get a whole lot of them and then give them out to us.
So you know
I used
what
to be a bad girl.
so you know what I was saying about the way the neighborhood looked at the time. It was a wasteland, basically.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And, you know, I can identify with you because I have many friends that died from drugs, so I know.
So she asked, like, did I use anything from my life in my book? And yes, I think the center of my book comes right directly from my life. There's something in the book that Dr. Kasim talks about called black noise. And for people who don't know, in the book, Dr. Kasim has this philosophy that these men need to keep these white slaves, not for revenge. Revenge is just too simple. We need to keep the white slaves to have that in our back pocket so that when we are in we're face to face with white people, we could say, hey, you kept my people slaves, I kept your people slaves. So you're kind of putting things on an even playing field. So in the black noise is like just the interference in your mind that you feel like, you know, there's like a ingrained inferior, you feel inferior to white people, like, but it's ingrained because of media, etc. So anyway, when I actually sold a screenplay and I went out to Hollywood, I immediately was thrust into boardrooms and conference rooms and glass offices with white men in suits. You know, I'm a kid from the Bronx, you know, and the advertising industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry because they know one thing that's true, that if you bombard somebody with images all their life, they believe it. So if you're a kid growing up anywhere and you're looking at television and all the white people on television are important and smart and, you know, geniuses and black people are servants, it's in your head, you know. Even if you know that that's what's going on, it's still in your head. So when I go into these offices and these boardrooms and I see all these white men sitting around a table, you know, my immediate reaction is, you know, I'm nervous, I'm scared, I feel like I don't belong there. You know, that's kind of part of the black noise. So that's something that's talked about in the book. And that's something that every black person, not just men, has to deal with. Any other questions? No other questions?
Thank you for being here. As a teacher for 35 years, of course, I'm very interested in what is the message that you have for today's youth, and do you visit schools, and how do you get that message across?
I have visited schools. I have talked about being a writer. I wish I could do it more. I mentioned something last night about the program of putting books in barbershops, which I want to try to get involved in somehow. I mean, part of my speech is about, like we were talking last night about why there's not a lot of black men reading fiction. And I think that it starts when they're kids. It starts when they're little kids. It starts with what type of books are put in front of them. You know, because like I was saying last night, like a lot of my friends, like all my friends, you know, across the spectrum, all different races, but my black friends, my black buddies, who are very smart guys, they don't read fiction. So whenever I'm discussing fiction, I'm discussing it with my white friends or my Asian friends. And my black friends, they read my book, but that's like the only book they've read in like 20 years, you know? So I just think it starts with kids. I think we need to, and you know, people say, well, we need to put books in front of kids that they can relate to, like books about black, you know, heroes and things. I think that's great. I think that's fine. But I think there's all sorts of books that can grab a kid's imagination. It doesn't just have to be about black people. You know, like the book Wrinkle of Time, that's not about black people, but that book blew my mind away. It's like, whoa. It was just like something, actually, maybe it's better to give them something completely different, because something they never experienced before. Maybe that's the thing that will shake them up. And I really believe that. Like somebody said that reading, I think it was Earl. Earl has said that reading, it teaches you critical thinking. It just teaches you a new way to think, a new way to see the world. So I think it's really important. I'm definitely going to try to do more. Somebody's phone is ringing. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, comic books are good.
So if there was some form of a comic book maybe that talked about
Yeah.
the black experience,
Yeah.
maybe they would read it.
When I was a kid, it's funny. When I was a kid, I remember my parents and my friends' parents like not wanting us to read comic books. Like literally, like get rid of that comic book, like it was a bad thing. But I don't think any reading is necessarily bad. You know, things have changed really because comic books are the big thing now, right? Yeah, for sure. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
My question is how different.
Oh, sure.
My question is, how do international, I guess your international readers respond, I guess in relation to the American experience or reading about the American experience and their interpretation of it?
Well, I could only communicate with the ones that actually speak like English speakers. The book is, okay, it's out in Czechoslovakia and Germany and in the UK, and I think someplace else, I'm not sure exactly. But I love the Czechoslovakian cover is amazing. It's like a white fist, like, you know, the Black Power fist? It's a white power fist. I think that's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I get emails. It's so cool. Like I get emails and the guy said, "Oh, I'm from Czechoslovakia and I read your book and I think it's amazing and I didn't know much about the slave thing in America, and this, you know." And everybody seems to ask, especially the foreigners, they want to know when there's a movie coming. They see Americans as movies. You know, they want to know when's the movie coming. A great thing that happened, because, you know, they were talking about publishing here. Like, so my book was published by Atria, which is a division of Simon & Schuster. And they don't throw a lot of money behind new books or new writers. They just don't, in terms of promotion. But somebody sent me from, I think it was like, I want to say Sweden? I don't know where it was. But it was a big department store, and they gave my book a whole window. It was like a whole display, like with, it was amazing. I was like, wow, that's really amazing. I was totally blown away by that. Steven Spielberg should do it? I wish. I wrote the book to be a movie. If anybody's read the book, a lot of people say it feels like a movie. I wrote it to be a movie. I had a master plan. Like this is my master plan. Because I know what it takes to make a movie in terms of like locations and, you know. So one of my ideas is that the movie has to be centrally located because then it's cheaper to make, you know, and it has to be a small cast because then it's cheaper to make, right? And it has to be a very dominant male lead because then you get a star to be in the movie and then you get the budget to make the movie. So when I wrote the book, I wrote it with the idea in my head that eventually it's going to lead to another job of me writing a screenplay, right, and be in a movie. So once I finished the book, it went to a bunch of people. There was a guy in Hollywood who takes books and he sells them to studios. And this guy, the guy who had my book, he had sold, I think, Twilight to the studios, and I think he sold the Hunger Games also. So I had a really top guy shopping my book around Hollywood. And yeah, you can see like there's no movie, right? So the response was like, we can't make this movie. This movie's crazy, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess what it's going to take, like I said last night, what it's going to take is a very brave producer, very brave studio. But honestly, I don't think it should, because I mean, yeah, the movie's edgy or the idea is edgy. But I think once it's made, I think people will. I mean, there's way edgier stuff out there than my story, you know. Yeah, they don't want to. Right. I've gotten like, when I wrote the book and I showed it to people like in the publishing world, I got some pushback too. I mean, obviously, I got pushback. I mean, there's a scene in the book that's very rough. I know whoever's read it, they know what scene I'm talking about. It's like the roughest, craziest scene in the book. And people have told me, people said, you got to take that scene out. You got to take that. You can't have that in the book. And I literally told them, no, I will. Oh, I said, no, I will not take this scene out because this is the scene that gives the book gravity. This is the scene that really shows you what the stakes are in this story. And this just leads me to say that one of the great things about writing a book is that the author is listened to, at least in my experience, by the publisher. Because when I write a movie and I hand in a script, if they don't like something, they say, change it. Change that. You don't have a choice. If you don't do it, you get fired. And believe me, I've been fired plenty of times for fighting with directors and fighting with producers. But my publisher, when he handed me back my book, it was filled with edits and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God. And then he looked at me and he said, listen, this is what we did. If you don't agree with anything, just ignore it. I'm like, what? I'm like, are you serious? Ignore it? He's like, yeah, just we talk about it. And honestly, these people, the guy was really smart. The people that edited the book were really smart. And I would say 95% of the stuff they asked me to change, I did. Because I agree with them 100%. And the stuff that I pushed back on, we talked about a little bit, and then they just let it go. And that was an amazing experience for me. It really was. Because again, I have been through the ringer. I mean, I've sold a lot of stuff, but I've been through the ringer in Hollywood. I really have. I mean, I got some war stories, like for real. Like people with guns on the table, like crazy stuff. Yeah.
My question is, more of a statement. When your book was recommended to me, I'm right here, my sister, she had read your book and she said, April, you have to read this book, and the name of it is 40 Acres. So I thought about Spike Lee. I was like, why am I going to read that? And so then I thought it was really a slave book because of the name. In the cover. Well, the thing of it is that, so I had a closed mind going in. So after maybe the first chapter or so, I said, this man is insane. What is going on here? And I was hooked into the end. I just want to let you know you're a very good writer. I was really, really, really intrigued the entire time. And I think I read it within 2 days. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you. When I decided to write a book, I really, I didn't do it for a long time because like in screenwriting, when you're writing, if you're an independent writer, you're trying to write $1 million spec. Every time you write something, you're not just trying to write something to just be another script. You're trying to hit a home run every time you sit down and write a script. So I basically took that approach to my book. I'm like, okay, I have all these stories, but if I try to write a novel, I got to try to write something that's so out there and is going to get attention, and I got to write it in a way that is going to be like that people can just eat it up, So I read a lot of authors. I read like authors who write books like that, like James Patterson and things like that, and I just kind of copied them a little bit. Thank you. Any other questions? Sharon. Sharon is awesome. She really is. She really is. Authors.
Everybody from this side of the door around, please come up. We're going to take a picture with Dwayne. And we're doing this because the photographer and my husband fussed at me and said, I have too many this year. They don't think we can get you all in a picture. So let's do half and half.